What is the cruelest thing you've ever seen a teacher do? Told me to stand behind the door because I was chatting too much. I was 5, did as told. Principal marched down the corridor and threw the door open to come into the classroom, hitting my face hard. She whipped it back and asked in shock why I was there. I was crying and I looked at my teacher because I was scared to say I was there because I'd been chatting. My teacher looked at me right in the eyes and said, "Yeah, why are you standing there?" I can't express into words the kind of strange betrayal I felt as a child. 8th grade, a chubby kid in my class ran down the hall into my class and was wearing his Browns gear. Brown jacket with Kellen Winslow Jr. jersey. A teacher followed him and yelled into the class that she was looking for a fat butt dressed like a Tootsie Roll. The kid broke down into tears. That's more brutal than what one of the students could come up with. Kid in the class had a stutter, and one day after he gave an answer, the teacher straight up just went, "That's all, folks." As someone who has a family full of stutterers, that is so freaking wrong. That kid will never forget that, and I guarantee it made his stutter so much worse. What a prick. I once misbehaved in class and asked my teacher not to tell my dad because he would hit me. True. She said okay. Another day, not long after, I did something bad again and she basically said, "You deserve to be hit," and then told my dad, as well as telling him that I told her he would hit me. Later, at home, he then hit me. Didn't report alleged child abuse, and then did something to ensure it continues. Double whammy. My kindergarten teacher spanked me and made fun of me because I couldn't do a push-up correctly. Frick you, Ms. Jonathan. That is a stupid last name. Frick you, Ms. Jonathan. Picture it with me. British Columbia, 1992. A kindergarten teacher decides to teach her class a word in French. The word, egg, and Français, oaf. Now kids, to say it properly, try punching yourself in the stomach. There was a classroom of 5-year-olds punching themselves in the stomach repeatedly for a good 5+ minutes while yelling oof. Some of us felt this was ineffective and we started punching each other in the stomach. She sat there and watched, smiling. It was the first and only word of French she ever attempted to teach us. I'm sorry, but that's freaking hilarious. When I was in 5th grade, I was a very slow reader, especially when reading aloud. I absolutely hated it. Anyway, we would take turns reading from a book after recess each day. Well, one day we had a sub and it was my turn to read. I got about 2 sentences out when the sub burst out laughing and told me to quit while I was ahead. She asked one of my classmates to take over reading and asked me to return to my seat. I was so embarrassed. I wrote an anonymous, I'm sure he knew it was me, letter to my teacher explaining what had happened. He gladly reported it and she never subbed at the school again. Only until recently have I been able to get over my fear of public speaking. Good job on getting over your fears. I've never had an experience like that, and it still scares me. You have a lot of courage to overcome that fear. 2nd grade teacher had an incubator and chicken eggs. Each day, 2 kids had to care for the eggs. One child turned the eggs in the incubator and the other replaced the incubator lid, all unsupervised. Our teacher was mean to begin with and we feared going to her for help. It was almost a given that whoever replaced the incubator lid would crack an egg. One day, this happened when the chicks were near term. She blew up at us, screaming and blaming us for what had happened. What happened next is seared into my mind 20 years later. She lifted the cracked egg, and all I saw was a bloodied fetus, slowly moving its mouth open and closed. A few of the kids screamed. I cannot believe a teacher would A. Notice that we obviously could not put this lid on right several times preceding this incident, B. Wouldn't supervise us, and C. would so cruelly blame us for what was a genuine accident. Dang dude. Homeroom teacher asked kid why he didn't have a written excuse for being absent the previous day. Kid said he didn't know, just didn't have one. Not being adversarial in the least. What did you say? Teacher snapped. Called the kid up to the front of the class and smacked him across the face. Sounded like a firecracker going off. The entire class was stunned. Kid went back to his desk with tears in his eyes. This was 10th grade, I think. long ago. Nothing ever really happened, but I think the kid was out of school for a few days after that. Freaky. Teacher was definitely known for being a bully and a hard butt. The kid was definitely not a troublemaker and pretty mellow and well liked. Everybody felt sorry for him. I think the teacher would be in deep crap today. Most 10th graders I knew would have smacked him back. Had a teacher complain about my binder being dirty and unorganized because I cluttered every handout into the front and back pockets. Apparently this was frowned upon because I was an avid student. The only logical solution for him was to take my binder, walk up to the front of the class, and flip it upside down to dump out all the papers in it across the floor. He then told me to pick it up and went and sat down at his chair with a smug look on his face. When I was in Avid, my Avid teacher bought me new pencils and a new binder and all that crap when he saw that mine was falling apart. I'm from a small town and in junior high I was only one of 10 minorities in our entire school. There was only one black girl in our class, let's call her Beth, and she was kind of socially awkward. She would lie about stupid things like having a BF on a football team at a different school. Other than that she was harmless. We had Spanish class together and our teacher was a huge B. To this day I remember her face and name because she was just so awful. Her memory is burned into my mind. Anyway, one day Beth comes in with this weave. She goes from a short afro to long curly hair in a day, and obviously kids are awful and are just talking crap all day about it. In the middle of class our C teacher looks at Beth with the most crap eating grin and says, "You know you have to wash that, right?" She was talking about Beth's weave. In the middle of class in front of everyone, a C of a person feels the need to put down a girl who already doesn't fit in. I will never forget this. I wish I had the courage back then to say something or at least tell an adult about what happened. I wish I had stuck up for Beth. I hope that teacher rots in her own bitterness. In my freshman math class in college, our professor constantly picked on and made fun of the kid who sat next to me who had a pretty wicked learning disability. She would roll her eyes at his questions, or straight up ignore him, tell him concepts he was struggling with were really easy, and would call him out if he was taking too long to work through problems. My brother struggled with ADD and dyslexia growing up. Mostly he got by on charm, but privately he fought so hard just to keep up in class. This experience freshman year is why I haven't encouraged my brother to attend college even though he's said he wants to. When we were 10 years old or so, our teacher was the father of a student. Whenever he was in a bad mood, he would call his son on the board, ask him a question. If the answer was wrong, he would beat the living crap out of him. That went for 2 years. Now, 15 years later, whenever this guy drinks, steps are 1. Blaming his father. 2. Threatening everyone. 3. Goes berserk. 4. Passing out crying for help. Poor guy's really fricked up. I hope he gets the help he needs. I have to. Either first or second grade, we were rehearsing for some play. Kids who had lines to read stood in front of the class. One girl really had to use the bathroom, but since she asked after we started the activity, she wasn't allowed to go according to this teacher. The girl asks again about 10 minutes later, is clearly doing the pee dance. Again the teacher refuses to let her go. Another minute or so goes by, and it's her line but she's silent. I look over at her, and I hear her say, "I just had an accident," followed by what seemed like a solid minute stream of urine leaking onto the floor. She cried and ran to the main office. Her parents were super pee about that. Teacher didn't lose her job either. The second time is I think 6th grade. Our school had a gifted and talented arts program for select 5th-6th graders. The arts program typically ended before the end of school day, so about 5-10 minutes before we're dismissed, all the gifted and talented kids come back to class. There was a kid in my class that was an incredible artist, especially for being that age. The kid comes back from the gifted and talented program and puts down a really nice drawing that he had been working on for weeks. It's the end of the day, and every kid in the class is really disengaged and ready to go home for the day, so the teacher was getting pretty frustrated that she couldn't hold our attention. The kid who came back asked what page we were reading on. The teacher flipped, saying he was distracting the class trying to teach. I tried to stand up for him, but the teacher shut me up quick. She got up, went over to this amazing drawing that he finally finished, ripped it in half and told him to get your act together. The kid was clearly devastated. All that work literally ripped apart in front of him. I have never been more pee off for someone to this day. Her parents were super pee. Did you just? First grade teacher was a B. Treated a classmate who was in a wheelchair for a broken leg like she had a mental disability and was subhuman. Didn't like kids who were too smart or worked too fast for her. The crap icing on the turd cake of dealing with her was when she told a classmate whose brother had just days prior died in a car accident to get over it. Mrs. G, I know you probably aren't reading this, but just why? What was wrong with you that day? I went to a pretty morally depraved middle school. I have seen teachers straight up join in on calling kids fat or ugly and crap like that. In 10th grade, a teacher told everyone to leave the room except one girl because they were about to fight. She got caught and suspended because the security guards heard the noise. When I was in 1st grade, I went to a bilingual elementary school in the Bay Area. One day the class was taught in Spanish, and the next day, in English. We had a new student named Luis, who had just moved from Mexico. He didn't know any English at all, but would always try his best to say good morning teacher every morning to our cruel Cornish teacher, Miss Volberg. One day, an English day, we all had to write in our journals about our weekend. Everyone had to stand up in front of the class and share what they had written. When you were done, you got an Oreo cookie. Luis had permission to write and share his in Spanish since he was still learning English. However, when he finished, Miss Volberg asked him in English if he wanted an Oreo cookie as she held it up. Obviously, since she held it up, he understood he was being offered a cookie, so he nodded. She then said, "If you really want it, you must say Oreo," as she continued holding it up. Again, Luis nodded, as all he understood was that he was being offered a cookie. "Say Oreo," I remember her snapping. Again Luis nodded. She then said something along the lines of, "Fine, I guess you don't want it," and ate it. I remember Luis then sitting back down, looking sad and confused. Miss Volberg was a B. She did crap like that all year. English not being my first language either, this hit me right in the feels. I already posted here with one that I saw. Here's one that I didn't see but the whole school knew about, but I never heard all the details. There was a girl, can't remember what grade she was in, but she got in trouble for something or other. As punishment, our principal locked her in a storage room so she could think about what she had done. He then forgot about her and went home for the night. Police were called when the girl never came home. They questioned the teacher. She said the last she saw of the girl she was headed to the principal's office. The principal was then questioned and of course released the girl from the storage room. Then we got a new principal. Not sure what happened to the old one, but the new principal was quite possibly the greatest principal I ever had. In fact, I'm going to look him up right now and see if he's not dead yet. That's how much I love this principal. My 5th grade teacher was an butthole. He stole a lot of my books because he didn't want me reading in class, even if it was during designated reading time. Later, I took up writing and had a whole notebook full of stories. When he found it on my desk and threw it away, he also liked to take my class out to dodgeball whenever he was angry at someone. He would put himself on a team with his favorite students and put the rest of us on the other team, where he would taunt us for not being good at dodgeball and throw the balls hard enough to leave bruises. One day, he hit a kid in the ear. The kid hit the ground and just started sobbing while blood and a slimy, pale liquid seeped out of his ear. The teacher just stood there and laughed. When I was in 8th grade, I was pulled out 15 minutes early every other Monday for half the year to go see a shrink for my depression. The dude told the entire class and encouraged the other kids to bully me. He also held me back from honors science even though I had an A because he knew my math grade wasn't good enough to move up a class unless I was in honors science. Luckily my math teacher decided to waive me, believing that I would perform well in geometry and get the hang of basic algebra there. Again, more stories of teachers attacking children, and yet no one sets them on fire. I don't understand how so many teachers can be terrified to hug a student without being on the receiving end of a lawsuit, but so many teachers here are physically attacking them without punishment. Make fun of the LD and special ed kids. I grew up with ADHD and severe anxiety and had a lot of trouble in school. I was really smart. I understood the material, but I struggled in a standard classroom setting and couldn't concentrate or speak up when I was called on. My second grade teacher was complete C to me and the few other troubled kids in my class. She'd purposely call on me knowing I wouldn't be able to answer, just to watch me squirm while the other kids laughed. She'd make fun of my clothes and hair too. There was one special ed kid who had been left behind and she would openly make fun of him for being dumb. She'd yell at him for having a messy desk, and then she'd tip it over and dump the contents all over the floor. Poor kid would have to scramble around to pick everything up while the other kids taunted him. 27 years later and I still hate that bee. If she is still alive, look her up and tell her you hate her freaking butt. I was the teacher who did it, and it was totally unintentional. I teach at a language training school, not graded school, so I don't just teach one level of kids, which would have probably saved me from my mistake. Anyway, my favorite class. I've had it for 6 years, and they're all little darlings. I still look at them like the cute little kindergartners they started out as, though they're in 6th grade. One day just last month one of the girls, the best student, was being miserable and not participating. We all have bad days, but it was totally unusual and constant, and I was getting annoyed. At one point she got up and grabbed her bag. I said, "Where are you going?" She replied, "The bathroom." I answered, "You don't need your bag to go to the bathroom." She started crying and I immediately realized what I had done. The whole class now knew she had her period. Especially as a language teacher, you shouldn't be forgetting periods. Had my 11th grade Algebra 2 teacher call out the really sensitive smart girl for forgetting a homework assignment. Probably meant well because he wanted her to succeed or whatever, but he got to the point where everyone was really uncomfortable. Not to humble brag or anything, but I literally never brought my homework to class, so he basically had given up on me, but he would never call me out for not bringing it. I was a smart butt and I don't think he thought I was worth the trouble. So I diverted his rant to me by drawing attention to the fact that I didn't bring the homework either while defending her. He called me a useless waste of a roster spot and proceeded to tell everyone his thoughts about people like me. He was an butt, but it was worth it. Good for you, trying to help like that. One time we had this temporary teacher for a couple of months. She basically was a drill sergeant and kept picking on the same 2-3 girls in the room who were overly sensitive. Every single maths lesson was a complete waste learning wise, since it was an hour of a woman asking these 14-year-olds to man up and them crying. That's so wrong in so many ways. As an awkward 14-year-old girl, I feel for them. I've had teachers treat me like crap. I am loud around my friends but quiet in class. A chemistry teacher of mine in 10th grade made a kid stand out in a thunderstorm, no cover, for 45 minutes because he was talking to the person next to him during class. One of my former teachers was great when this happened. He understood students sometimes need more sleep than they get, so he would take the sleeping student's notebook and ask for volunteers to take down the notes for them. My art teacher gave me a color blindness test after I handed in an assignment in front of the whole class. Pretty much crushed my artistic aspirations. There's theories that Van Gogh may have been colorblind. Not that it undoes anything, but one day, when you're standing triumphantly atop the smoldering wreckage of your teacher's dreams and accomplishments, you can mention that to him. For your information, corporal punishment was still practiced in schools, though technically illegal. I attended a small village school for my primary education, so no one followed up with this stuff. There were some students in class 8 who were accused of dating each other. The headmistress called the names of couples in front of the whole school assembly to shame them, and beaten by some teachers. The girls were forced to shave their hair bald. Does it count if it was done to me? In elementary school I was really shy and socially isolated and didn't know how to make friends, and I was in group therapy for it. One day in 5th grade I was talking to a girl who happened to be well known for always having lice. I saw something in her hair and, thinking it was a piece of dust, I told her to hold still and I ran my fingers through a small section of her hair to get it out. Turns out it was an adult louse. I stared at it in horror, not quite knowing what to do, while other kids started noticing and the girl began to get upset. We both got sent to the principal's office and had to be checked for lice. I felt horrible. My teacher obviously didn't understand what had happened or that it was a mistake and said to me, "See, that's why you don't have any friends," before sending me out of the classroom. This will always stick out to me as one of my worst childhood memories. At the time, I just felt like crap. Looking back on it now, she absolutely should have been reprimanded for not only being so cruel, but using her privileged knowledge of my problems. I'm guessing my teachers knew about the social issues and the group therapy to shame me in front of my peers who had no business knowing about it. My second grade teacher was emotionally abusive, so much so that it resulted in me having night terrors, wetting the bed, at 8 years old, and getting asthma. Maybe a coincidence, maybe not. As soon as my mom connected the dots with help from my doctor, she decided to remove me from the class. When my mom told me I wasn't going to have to go back to Mrs. S's class, I burst into tears and said, "She's going to throw away my school supplies." I don't remember it now, but apparently when another girl switched out of the class, Mrs. S took her desk to the front of the room, opened it and said, "Well, since Erica isn't in our class anymore, she won't be needing her crayons." Whoosh, right into the trash. She won't be needing her ruler. Into the trash. Repeat. I feel your pain. My first grade teacher was emotionally abusive toward me. Unfortunately, no one helped me get switched out, so I suffered through the year and was also physically ill as a result of the abuse. Hope you're doing okay. It's a very traumatic thing to go through at such a young age. I've seen a teacher make a little girl clean up their own puke before heading to the medical room. She was crying and gagging the whole time. D. It's senior year of high school for my brother and he finishes the last exam that he has that day. It's with a teacher that he doesn't like and hasn't gotten along with. As he leaves, the teacher stops him. "What's that?" pointing at a little pink rubber eraser on someone else's desk. "It's a bomb," he sneers sarcastically. After that, he walked out, and after that, without further discussion, the police were called. He was not allowed to leave, and he was held in the principal's office until the police arrived. The administrators and teacher wanted him charged with making terroristic threats and threatening to blow up the school. They wanted him in prison. The cops heard what was said. The teacher actually thought recounting the eraser would help her, and refused to press charges. The administration and teacher agreed that instead, all of his grades would be changed to zeros and he would be forced to repeat the entirety of his senior year, while having a full year of F's count towards his high school GPA. He would not graduate until next year at soonest. I remind you, this is the last day of school in his senior year. If they had let him walk out, they would have never seen him again. Once our parents got wind of the situation, legal action was started immediately. It took about a month, but the school and the teacher got the message to just let it fricking go. So yeah, the cruelest thing that I've ever heard a teacher do is try to throw someone in prison for being a snide smart butt, and when that didn't work, trying to force them to retake senior year. The cruelest comment that ever involved me and teachers was my 4th grade math teacher telling my father at a parent-teacher conference that I would never amount to anything in my life. This was told to him, and behind my back, because my timed multiplication quiz scores were low. I tutor physics undergrads UB. My gym coach gave a few kids permission to jump me in the locker room. Luckily, I went to a fancy rich kids school, so all the kids were pussies and didn't do anything. Someone tried to jump me in the locker room in HS gym my freshman year. His sucker punch connected, but I swung around and threw his body into the locker. There was blood. Kids fared out of class not long after. I've got a few. I'll try to be brief. 1. In elementary school, private, we were struggling with our timetables and the kid in the back who was struggling the most was forced to go stand in the closet so the rest of the class could finish the exercises. 2. Just before graduating middle school, my resource teacher outright told me to not take Japanese as a foreign language because of my disability. I went on to take it in high school and got A's. But a teacher looking out for a student is one thing, but hampering them based on disability isn't right, Imo. 3. My Japanese teacher, mentioned above, saved me from my depression in my second year, and became my mentor and someone I could confide in. In the beginning of my junior year, he insisted I change my classes to go into his advanced Japanese class, only to then drop me and ignore me for the rest of high school because he suddenly thought I had a crush on him, despite no line having ever been crossed. That sent me back into depression while I took extra night classes to stay involved with Japanese, while my other classes suffered that year. 4. Now in college, I had a poetry teacher who would grade everyone harshly, beyond even giving feedback. It was just insults and disgust on everyone's essays. He would then quiz us on our 60 key terms but then change them to Latin because he assumed we needed to know those as well, which we didn't. He ended up giving most of us C's and D's even though he did nothing to clarify his expectations. Worst thing is, his class is a requirement for English majors. My high school basketball coach used to yell "You can't hear me, can you?" at the deaf janitor every time he turned his back. Weird kid was being bullied by most of the year group, and would spend every day alone in the library to avoid the buttholes who would start fights and spread bulls, usually either homophobic or generic vileness, criticizing everything from way to religion, some going as far as to threaten rape or try to convince an already suicidally depressed teenager that suicide was the only option left. The library was the only safe space left away from the bullies. The teachers knew exactly what was going on, and suddenly as soon as they found out it was the last sanctuary, the only place away from cruelness, banned anyone from staying in there, forcing said weird kid to stay with the Ashats. Their only advice on how to deal with the bullies was to pray about it, and purposely paired them with their tormentor at every opportunity. Source: I was that weird kid. Teachers didn't give a dang. I am sorry you had to go through that. Hope you're doing okay now. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.